The living room is where you make life's most beautiful memories. But your sofa shouldn't be the one remembering them. The new life-resistant, high-performance furniture collection from Ashley is designed to withstand all the spills, slip-ups, and muddy paws that come with the best parts of life. Ashley high-performance sofas and recliners are soft, on-trend, and easy to clean. Shop the high-performance furniture in-store or online at ashley.com. Ashley, for the love of home.
This is your Chargers linebacker, Daiyan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. This is your first time tuning in the show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, it's good to see your face, sir. It definitely has felt like longer than a week since we have done our last show. And to everybody in the chat, everybody who's tuning in, it is good to be communicating with you because Dan and I are very excited to get into today's episode because not only obviously do the Chargers kick off week 3 of their OTAs, a lot of stuff to obviously dissect and talk about there, but continuing on this storyline segment that Dan and I started last week with the defensive line, getting into the really nitty-gritty of it, the depth of it, talking about the coaches, the personnel, how are the Chargers ultimately going to improve at that position. Today, we're talking about the wide receiver group. And of course, it was just almost just perfect timing for certain individuals to take the podium yesterday. And so we can have an opportunity to dissect this. This is Dan's topic that he wanted to talk about. It's been, we've been tooling around with this for the last couple of weeks, so we're really excited to get into it. But obviously, everybody in the chat, feel free to join in because we are not going to be the only ones talking here today. Your voices are definitely going to be heard, so we definitely encourage it. Dan Wolkenstein, I have talked too much for the past 45 seconds. So, sir, how are you?
I'm great.
Good rebuttal. Good rebuttal with a one-word answer. I really appreciate it.
If we average the 2, we're down to like 30 seconds. So
yeah, now we're back online.
No, I'm good. Honestly, I think Chargers fans have been kind of waiting to see this wide receiver group at the podium. Sanjay Law at the podium as well. Josh Palmer was there. Quentin Johnston was at the podium. You saw a lot of things from Ladd McConkey at OTAs. So basically how this is going to go, part 1, we'll do kind of an OTA recap, some of the takeaways that we had, some interesting storylines regarding OTAs specifically for this week. Then we'll get to kind of the big picture, big rock key storyline of this wide receiver group. Expectations, is there improvement? What to make of this with some of the comments paired by the staff and players today. But like Jake said, live shows, we all know how this works. Put it in the comments in the chat. Things you'd like us to discuss, to bring up. Comments you may have, we will try to weave them in and out as we go through. Jake, let's get rid of all of the things we need to do that are not fun. Let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your number one source for all of your summer sports this season, from baseball, golf, NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available for you to follow for all of your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag. Use the promo code Unleashed or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Once again, use that promo code Unleashed. Go over to betonline.ag. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Mark Matlock starts this thing off. Bolt up, Bolt fam. James Wagner, all caps, bolt up, guys. Shout out to James Wagner, huge friend of the show. All the love to you. Man, it's a great time to be a Chargers Nation fan. Hope all of you are having an awesome week. Athir is here. Are we live? Let's go. Hello, Dan and Jake. Mighty with the eyes over here. Mighty got the Thor's hammer in the background. What's up, fellas? Jake?
Mjolnir was a fantastic Christmas gift from my wife. And I told her the next thing that is going up right above the closet, right behind me, will be Stormbreaker. So soon enough, you'll see another addition to the room as it relates to the Marvel.
And I live under a rock because I have no idea what that second thing was that you just said. So my
Dan,
apologies.
you've watched the Infinity Saga. Come on now.
It was
first of all, you were happy that you got through that. It was like pulling teeth just to get you to do it in the first place, and then you did it, and then you really enjoyed it.
Out of here. Do you want to bring our wives into that? Because we can bring that in. You can bring that up if you want to.
Moving on.
Anywho, OTA takeaways, Jake. We saw lots of things in this one. Shout out to Eric over the Chargers, as well as Daniel Popper, who provided some really important insight, as well as one Jeff Miller, who got some fun FaceTime on an episode from Haley Elwood last week that she was on the show with us. Some of the major takeaways that I had seen, I think the first one, first and foremost, is, this is the Harbaugh era. We've all kind of talked about it, but whether it's attention to details, the new fun things that they do, stopping, whether it's camp or in installs to make sure people have things right. We're seeing things with the offensive line that I think has people kind of excited and maybe some consistency there. Alex Leatherwood, by the way, we'll talk about this, but taking second team right tackle reps. Ladd McConkey doing his thing, but let's just get this thing out of the way. I think it's pretty fair to say Justin Herbert is up to Justin Herbert things. According to people who were there, he was absolutely slinging it at OTAs.
Yeah, talk about what he was doing on third down, three touchdowns in his 5 red zone trips that he threw yesterday, and all to individuals that maybe you didn't figure that he'd be throwing these touchdowns to. So we're talking about the likes of a undrafted free agent rookie tight end, Zach Hines, rookie Isaiah Spiller caught one in the flat for a 7-yard touchdown. Stone Smart was another recipient of a touchdown in those red zone drills. But it just seemed like Justin Herbert was in his bag throwing out there in drills today. So again, I know we're in June, and I know last month we were in May, and we're talking about football and expectations, but it's just this sense where you just feel like, can football get here tomorrow? And talking about Justin Herbert like this and getting back to this, because last year obviously was a very unfortunate season for Justin Herbert to deal with. Feels like Groundhog Day again to mention Justin Herbert and the prohibited I word that we don't like using on this show. And to think about it with
ice in his veins. That's the I word we're using now. Ice in his veins.
You know what? That's the word we're going to use. That's the term we're going to use. I like it because there's been some conversations about that this week as well. And that one Morgan Fox had to come to the defense of his quarterback in that circumstance.
Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Sure, we can go off on a tangent and talk about that. I'm sure. I mean, it got a lot of attention, so why not?
So, one Chris Harris, folks probably remember the name, played with the Chargers for a bit, also played with the Broncos, was on, I believe, Kay Adams this week, and had nice things to say about Justin Herbert. So it wasn't all poo-pooing Justin Herbert. One of the things that he did say that I think caught the headlines and irked a lot of people and former and current players alongside Justin Herbert was that he needs to be more clutch and is not clutch enough. I don't have the exact quotes, but we've talked about this ad nauseum. And, Jimmy comes on here and says that he may be looking for some clickbait material. I'm not sure. We've spoken to Chris a few times. Great dude, honestly. And I'm going to tread lightly here because we all love Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert I think is one of the last people to blame for some of the struggles this team has had. That does not mean that Justin Herbert couldn't improve and get better in certain clutch moments, which we have discussed, and we have gotten flack for saying that at times. Go back and look at a lot of spots last year. That being said, to say that he is not clutch is just insane. And there have been countless times that we have talked about. We don't need to go through all of them, but how many times we have seen this defense absolutely drop the ball and cost this team win after win after win in those inopportune times at the biggest of stages, playoffs, Chiefs, Raiders, you name it. I mean, you can go down the list of 5-6 games last year that it happened where Justin Herbert did his job, defense didn't do theirs. So kind of missed me with that low-hanging fruit on something that I don't think is, and I think the part that we got flack for, Jake, was we could say that, but people would come back and say, that's not even the top 10 problems, which I agree with, of this team. Justin Herbert, what's the stat of this team with him quarterbacking when the defense is held opposing teams to what, 20-something points? It's like
it was like 23 and 6, or yeah. It was a vast discrepancy, that's for sure. I'll just piggyback off of what Dan said real quick because we don't need to go too far in this segment. It was, first of all, it was nice seeing Morgan Fox come back in defense of those comments to his quarterback. And I will say this, because nothing that Dan said is, the way Dan put that right now is perfect. Nobody on this show or anybody out there should really be thinking that Justin Herbert is perfect. He's definitely not flawless. There are some things in his game that he needs to take to the next level. But I think this whole narrative of Justin Herbert being overrated, here's how I'm going to change it. I think Justin Herbert is overhated.
100%.
I think he's 100%. Overhated. I'm not trying to say that Justin Herbert is, the best quarterback out there. Certainly not. The stats don't back that up. The play doesn't back that up. And he absolutely has to go out there and perform and make it count when he has to. But there's been plenty of instances where he's done that. And I think that people look at just like the low-hanging fruit to pick on, because you see basically just everything being compared to Justin Herbert, or this is the only reason that we're not talking about him in terms of the top quarterbacks that are out there. There have been plenty other elements in Justin Herbert's short tenured career outside of his own play that has kept him to where he currently is right now. This is why you went out and you got the likes of Jim Harbaugh to come in and remake this staff. So I will not stand here and say that Justin Herbert is overrated. I will say that he's overhated.
Yeah, and unnecessarily so. And I think it's because there's so much toxic, QB slander and these hot takes people are trying to get for clickbait and all that jazz. And it's easy to slander the quarterback because he's the one that makes all the money. But in short, he has had so little help from his surrounding cast, whether it's due to injury, whether it's due to coaching, scheme, situation, running, play, whatever, right? I was tagged in something today, and I think this is true, but I don't know. It's not me saying this is according to Chargers Muse. Since entering the league 4 years ago, Justin Herbert has been pressured 828 times, second most in the entire NFL. So the note here that they say, give Herbert a competent offensive line, I'll add, and a running game and a defense, and he will take over the league. I fully agree with this. And going back to OTAs, Justin Herbert was absolutely slinging it. We saw references of Ladd McConkey winning everywhere. We saw tight ends winning everywhere. Him throwing seeds. Josh Palmer getting stuff. Justin Herbert is Justin Herbert. I have zero concern about Justin Herbert being the quarterback of this team, and nor should any other fan of this team or anyone covering this team. I think we've seen certain accounts that like to go after certain players because they know it farms engagement. And that's kind of how I saw it. But the next part that I thought was interesting, and this is one that Chargers fans, there's people here in the chat asking about how The offensive line looks, asking about how Trey Pipkins is looking at right guard. Some interesting developments here, Jake. We are seeing the right side, and in fact, the entire offensive line, at least the first team, staying consistent for all of practice. That first team offensive line did not change the entire time. Most notably, Joe Alt at right tackle, Trey Pipkins at right guard. Jake, big deal, little deal, no deal.
Yeah, obviously, yes, it's a big deal, but at the same time, this is kind of where we expect things to be by the time that we hit September with Rashawn Slater, Daiyan Johnson, Bradley Bozeman, Trey Pipkins, and then finally Joe Alt at right tackle. This is what you went out and you spent your 5th round pick for. I think everybody's interested to see what Trey Pipkins is going to do at guard, considering that was the rumor when we were all discussing who that pick was going to be at 5. And then there was potential for everything that Daniel Jeremiah, which everything that he said was still spot on, because he was the one that even teased this idea out there in terms of putting it out in the rumor mill, was that if you take Joe Alt, what are you going to do with Trey Pipkins? And he was one of the first that I saw that floated the idea of kicking Trey Pipkins into guard. And to me, okay, that's great from the standpoint of, you have Trey Pipkins, who's now on the year 2 of a 3-year deal that he signed last offseason. So you're obviously paying him more money than you did Sawyer. So you're still paying your players, the ones you're playing the most, you're putting him out there, but you're still trying to find the best starting 5. So Sawyer's been rotating in and out between the first line, the second line, up until this point. I'm excited to see, honestly, what Trey Pipkins can do inside at guard, because I thought 2 years ago that was hands down the best season that he's had. Last year, he fell back down to what we were used to prior to that standout season. And now just think of it. Trey Pipkins is going to be standing next to a 6'8" Joe Alt, which can only be better for him from the standpoint of what we've seen him do traditionally off the edge. And whether it's getting beat inside, outside, it just wasn't a good look. And Trey Pipkins has not had the best start to his young career thus far. So again, this is all about finding the best 5 ultimately to protect number 10 at the end of the day. And from the standpoint of where the money's being put and these early indications on training camp, I like this combination. Not only do I think that it probably is the best 5 that you could put out there, but in terms of Trey Pipkins' confidence and ultimately how it's going to help his play, I think this is the right move.
According to Daniel Popper, the one part that I thought was a bit interesting and something to monitor was newly acquired Alex Leatherwood garnered all second team right tackle spots. A little surprising, in my opinion. I would not have thought that he would already be taking second team tackle spots, especially all of them. Is he impressing the staff? Are they seeing what he's got? I would have thought that they would be moving things around a bit, at least for the second team. Is that any deal to you?
Because remember,
no Sawyer's there. Like you're not seeing.
I mean, when you start going through the rest of the line, Dan, yes, Sawyer seems like an option that you could ultimately use as your backup right tackle. Personally, Sawyer's the quintessential swing tackle. We've seen what he could do at left tackle when he had to do it and step in for Rashawn Slater a couple years ago. We've seen him at right guard. I think he would have no problem stepping into there at right tackle if they ultimately needed to. But think about the combination of the guys that you have behind you. Alex Leatherwood, yes, for the tumultuous seasons that he has had, being on 3 teams in essentially 3 years, it's not a good look for him. You look at this as possibly a reclamation project. It's not even a guarantee that he's even going to make it out of camp. But I think with the second line now, Alex Leatherwood, Sawyer, Brendan Hymas, they were using Carson Barnhart and then Foster Sorrell at left tackle. And then there was some mix in there with Jordan McFadden as well. This I think is still being treated in the same type of way that you were treating the first team offensive line. Try to find the best 5. So if you have essentially the best 5 that you would expect to start in September for your first line, do the same for your second line. But I think that you are going to have a little bit more position versatility with some of these guys, and that ultimately is the point of depth, because Brendan Hymas can play guard or center. Jamari Sawyer can play tackle or guard. Jordan McFadden essentially is a 5-tool guy. You can insert him virtually anywhere for what his background has been. And so this is just the sorting out process to me. So it's not really a big deal to me that Alex Leatherwood, as it currently stands right now, is starting at right tackle. I think this is still the feeling out process.
This is the interesting part. So Mark Matlock says Sawyer is the swing tackle. Alt or Slater go down. Sawyer goes to guard. Pipkin goes to tackle. Okay, so right now, though, why wouldn't Pipkins be playing the second team tackle reps if he's the swing tackle? Or if he's a tackle if Alt goes down? Or at least like going in there with Leatherwood or McFadden or whoever else. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Maybe they're trying to get as many eyes on him as possible, give as many reps to see what he can do.
Remember, this is also possibly evaluating the best spot for Alex Leatherwood, because we've seen the tape and it's not pretty. And Joey Bosa had something to do with that early on in Alex Leatherwood's career. So I still feel like this is a feeling out process, because you go from a situation where the play is not good, on top of the coaching not being good, on top of the development not being good. You need to figure out the right spot for Alex Leatherwood. And whether he lasts to the season or he doesn't, I still think this is, again, that feeling out process. So I wouldn't take too much from this.
Tex McBoog, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. My biggest frustration with all the talking heads evaluating this team, it seems that they all wanted to see Harbaugh take over what the team had. They don't get the overhaul perspective, which, I mean, maybe, but like now, I think it's hard to argue that this team is overhauled by a long shot. So maybe people are frustrated and maybe people are surprised at how much move or how much turnover and churn there's been, but I think that's a good problem, if it's even a problem. Sweet Jump says if they can make Leatherwood look good, it's on. And if Slater goes down, Alt moves to left and Pipkins takes over right. I don't know about that.
That would probably make sense. You'd kick in Sawyer to right guard. That would probably end up being your starting five at that point, should the worst happen.
So you'd feel comfortable moving a rookie from his natural left over to right, back to left, and then back to right when he's done?
Let me ask you a question. So your choices would be Joe Alt, who has played very, very well at Notre Dame as a left tackle. You do Jamari Sawyer, who still admirably 2 years ago stepped in behind Rashawn Slater when Rashawn Slater went down.
That's what I'm saying. I think it'd be Alt.
Or you
right
have
side.
Foster Sorrell. I don't think it's any contest who would ultimately end up winning that out.
I think I'd rather see Alt on the right and then have either Sawyer or Pipkins at left. Probably Sawyer at left. Pipkins still being your right guard. I don't know. We'll see. Attention to detail. We had this here earlier, but as we get to the podium stuff, there's a lot of conversations from a lot of the guys at the podium talking about this new staff, the new era under Jim Harbaugh, what training camp's like with him, and the attention to detail, both at camp as well as during install. Sanjay Lal talked about that quite a bit. A couple takeaways that I had here that I saw that was interesting. Daiyan Henley, Denzel Perriman, according to Daniel Popper, were starting the first team defense at inside linebacker. Henley had a good rep against Kimani Vidal on a wheel route. Junior Colson is now doing individual drills. He was off the side, so he's seemingly coming back slowly but surely. And then what I thought was a fun one that I think Chargers fans are probably going to be excited about is not Jack in the Box, but James in the Box. Derwin James was seen during the 11-on-11 drills hovering either as a slot or box safety, and we have been clamoring for James to be in the box more. It's where he's most effective, most aggressive, and can play his instincts at best. Please, for the love of God, make this a normal thing. Can we please have Derwin in the box more? Please.
Dan, how about Tuli Tuipulotu getting home for a sack on a rush that he was rushing alongside Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. How many times have we been talking about this since last season? How many times have we talked about it so far this season? The best part about it is that if there is one thing to take away from certain defensive schemes that came in a previous regime, that was probably the most well orchestrated one, because when those three were on the field at the same time, the percentage, whether it was sacks or quarterback hurries, again, they only played it for 44 snaps last year, which is still ridiculous that you only got that much out of those three guys playing. But to think about Jesse Minter just sitting back and saying, that installation works, having those three guys. And I love the fact that he's going right back to it and not missing a beat, because that's only going to get better and it's only going to help the pass rush even more. So very excited to hear that they're right back to that same type of package.
Fellow LAFB brethren, Ryan Dyrud. What's up, boys? What's up, Ryan? Sweet jumps. Jake, you're getting little eyes here. Jake's getting the new mic.
You know, I had to eventually try to step up my game to match where it was with Dan. I actually got a new mic probably, I don't remember what it was, Dan, now, maybe like 6 months ago. And the whole thing just ended up being faulty and didn't work properly when it needed to. And for some reason, the computer wasn't able to recognize it. So I literally just had to toss it and said, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's try to figure this out. And thankfully, I think we found a winner here.
You sound wonderful.
Thank you.
I think you sound wonderful. I mentioned previously about the wide receiver, which again, second half of this is going to be all about wide receiver key insights and takeaways in terms of what this receiver room is going to look like. So the comments they had, as well as what to expect from the possibly improved wide receiver room, which we'll get to. But one of those receivers, Jake, that was ripping was WR Ladd McConkey. And according to, I think this was Daniel Popper that talked about it, he was winning everywhere. He was burning Jazir Taylor inside, outside. He went on out route, slants, over the middle. And it appears we had Haley Elwood on the show last week and was talking about her conversation with him and him trying to be quarterback's best friend, trying to learn a bunch as much as he can about the team, being a perfectionist and a precise route runner, which we'll get to in Sanjay Law's comments. But I thought the fact that Ladd's already doing Ladd things, I think is going to pay so many dividends at the regular season. Justin's going to love this kid.
I think the key takeaway, Dan, is what down was Herbert throwing to McConkey?
Fair.
Third down, which used to belong to number 13. When you needed that conversion the most, that's who you threw it to. It was third down and Allen. Yep. Now, all of a sudden, early in camp, it's turning into third and McConkey. Third and Ladd. Oh, Dan, I think we need to talk to Ryan and maybe get back in the shirt design room and maybe come up with something on that one if that ends up coming to fruition. Third and Ladd's just sounds really nice rolling off the tongue. That's
ladder drills would also be good.
Yeah, it's not. Ooh, also a nice one.
Because also his ladder drill, by the way, is insane.
Ladder drills. That's even better than mine. I like it.
Sorry.
But yeah, Dan, it's not just the fact that Ladd McConkey is coming in and doing Ladd McConkey things. It's look at the downs that he's doing. Look at the defenders that he's beating for those. And third down and long conversions. This is what everybody says that they could expect from Ladd McConkey in terms of everybody saying that he could quickly become Justin's favorite weapon. And I fully understand why. So again, I know we're talking OTAs here, but eventually you're going to come back in the middle of July when training camp really ramps up. You're not going to all of a sudden just deviate from this. So things to watch for as we get closer to next month.
Yes. And then this was a fun one. Probably the last of the main takeaways that I had was when you saw pictures and you heard references to On the Spot, which is apparently a new segment within OTAs where, according to Joshua Palmer and company, essentially they have a wise words segment where Coach Harbaugh will pick a player to give a speech, always on the spot. So there's no heads up. Nobody knows when they're going to be going up there to give a speech. And so essentially you got to be prepared at all times to be selected. Joey Bosa was the latest to go up there and do so, and apparently talked about just how excited he is to be on the team. And I kind of like this. And
I love this. But go on.
So I'll let you go first. What about this? Not necessarily what Joey Bosa said, but just the concept in general. What about it gets you excited?
First of all, is the concept is just fantastic. Obviously, at random that you select anybody to come up and start making a speech. So these could be guys that even from a veteran standpoint, like Joey Bosa, like when was the last time that you ever like heard of Joey Bosa actually coming up and giving a speech? Like normally,
never.
Normally, what we've heard is that the person giving the speech lately over the last couple of years has been Khalil Mack. That's been the, him and Derwin James, I would say, are probably the quote unquote leaders of that locker room over the last couple of years, especially in terms of being vocal. But Jim Harbaugh doing this and basically saying, I want you guys to think of something that you would say to the team, but you don't know when I'm going to ask you to say it. It creates a mindset. It creates a mindset that you stick with throughout the entirety of camp. It'll have that little nugget in the back of your head to say, is today going to be me? Is today going to be the day that I'm up there to talk? And Dan,
you gotta live by it too, because you're talking all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then you're not doing it.
That's it. Here we go again with just these little changes, little nuances, attention to detail, something that could look completely trivial, but it's all about creating a mindset. And I love what Jim Harbaugh is doing with this.
Yeah, I agree. A tier has a question. We'll get to yours in a second here, a tier. But Forgotten Lolcow says, seeing a lot of posts of Herbert showing more emotion and smiling makes me happy, makes me smile. Jake, did you see the ones of him at the concert? I think it was not Luke Bryan. Who is it that he was at the concert of?
I can't remember the country star, but I remember just seeing the post to say all it took was Joe Alt to get Justin Herbert out of his shell.
Luke Combs, maybe Luke Combs.
I couldn't remember who it was. And then for him on the golf course, when he hits the ball and then turns around, is like, "Where's the cameras?" And someone made the great point to say Justin Herbert's always avoiding the cameras. Like, what universe is this?
Well, I will say if he's golfing, which he's known for being a pretty darn good golfer. I mean, that's kind of him in his element.
Everybody would want to say, like, did you see that? Did you have it recording? Like,
yeah.
Dan and I have been golfing once, and it was not pretty. At least from my standpoint, it was not pretty. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. Golf. Yeah. And I could definitely say that I didn't want any cameras around me during that afternoon. But if you're actually playing and you're actually shooting good and you have some of those moments, hell yeah. So it's nice to see this emotion from Justin.
Yeah, I agree. Last question before we get to some of the podium stuff. Athir asks, Dan and Jake, my question is, if Herbert and his wide receivers go off in training camp, should Jesse Minter be concerned about his defense?
No. And I feel like it's funny. I feel like we get this question every single training camp when we'll hear like, "Oh, who won the day?" Which normally, historically, the defense always wins the first couple days of practice. I don't know particularly why that is, but for the Chargers, that's kind of been the trend for them. Now we'll see, because now you have Greg Roman and Jesse Minter essentially going against one another. To me, it just breeds competition, which essentially has been the message that Jim Harbaugh has been talking about ever since he arrived with the Chargers. Competitors welcomed. So, no, I don't think it's anything to worry about if Justin Herbert is out there with essentially a brand new receiving core, 3 new young guys, one new free agent, Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston added into that mix. And if Justin Herbert essentially is carving up the defense without a Keenan Allen, without a Mike Williams, I would be enthused about it. I'd be excited about it, because all that's going to do is it's going to remind the defense what happened to them that day, and they're going to come out the next day and they're going to try to kick ass.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not worried about that at all, especially with this defense. I think I would rather at this point. That's tough. Who would you rather see get the better of the other side, the wide receivers winning or the corners winning?
Here's why I will actually side with the wide receivers.
Oh,
Here's why I will actually side with them. Because when you think about all the change that took place on the offensive side of the ball, in comparison to the defense, it's actually, much more on the offensive side. But the reason that I will say that I like the offense winning, Jesse Minter has a factor that we have seen from the previous regime that they were never able to adapt. Jesse Minter can adapt. We've heard from Mike Elston last week. He called Jesse Minter the best defensive coordinator that he's ever played with. And Mike Elston has been in the league for 27 years. But in terms of situational play calling, the right time to do a defensive call, he says there's nobody better than Jesse Minter. So if Jesse Minter's defense gets their ass kicked one day, he's going to make sure that they're going to come to play the next day. And it's only going to make them better.
In-game manager, expert of adjustment, understands the back end, especially with the DB side, which has been kind of the Achilles heel for this team, for the Chargers team forever. Yeah, I don't think I'm not too worried about Jesse Minter. And when this whole thing started, that was the coach that I was most excited to bring in from the jump, and they got him somehow. All right, moving on to the press conferences. We got to hear from some of the coaches. Running back coach Leo McDonald and wide receiver coach Sanjay Lal spoke at the podium. Coach McDonald had some fun things to say about the running back room. And obviously Sanjay Lal talked about the receivers. Jake, who would you like to start with first?
Let's start with Coach McDonald, because I was actually happy that he was at the podium and to talk about this new running back group. So let's start with him.
All right. And I think there was James Wagner in here who said he has not got a chance to listen to those. So here you go. You get to have a quick preview before we get into where you can go listen to it yourself. But Coach McDonald was at the podium and was asked a bunch of questions about some of the running backs that were in the room, and was talking about Jim Harbaugh and kind of how physical and the style of play that he has is one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason why he came to this Chargers team. One part that I think Chargers fans might get excited about was, he understands the importance of a run game. And that's one of the reasons why he came here, noted the differences between when he was at USC and kind of sees this more of a Utah flavor of running game. But he said this is what stuck out to me, was we run everything under the sun. And he went on to kind of talk about the offensive scheme has a little bit of everything. It has RPO, inside, outside zone. He said he's had a lot of sleepless nights, but it's going to be something to behold. So pair that with what Sanjay Lal's talked about, where he was saying how a lot of people are kind of over talking this whole run game thing, and they're looking to be balanced, which we'll talk to you in a second. Coach McDonald talked about how you and I, Jay, we've mentioned this like group think component to this. There's a lot of guys trying to make sure they get this thing right. That's what I'm looking for, is you're not just going for the one trick pony or the two trick pony. And so it sounds like they got a lot of bullets in that holster. Went on to talk about some of the running backs, and as well as talked about Justin Herbert specifically, noted that Justin is amazing and is the epitome of, they have that TED slogan there every day, and just that he's incredible. Was asked about the running backs, Gus Edwards, JK, and Spiller. Had some nice things to say about Spiller. For Gus Edwards, noted his athleticism, tall, consummate professional, and he knows the scheme inside and out. For J.K. Dobbins, highly intellectual. He knows where to go, has grown as a leader. And the part that I thought was so fitting, Jake, he says that they are like thunder and lightning. When, boy, do we remember and enjoy those days.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, nice little harken back to some Chargers lingo from days past in the San Diego time. Dan, what I really liked was, again, when you were talking about his whole comments on the run under the sun, and then he got into the dynamic and how different it is between his days of coaching at USC to the pros and the volume difference. He says it's been a lot of sleepless nights, which, you could tell the work that he's putting into it. I think that, again, the the X factor here that it's some encouraging words, obviously, on Isaiah Spiller. It's just, what is this whole running back room going to look like? Because right now it sounds like, and we've heard differences with this with Chris Harry saying it, that if J.K. Dobbins is what he says he is, if he's 100% healthy, that he is going to be the starter. A lot of people would say it's the other way and say that it's Gus Edwards. Personally, I don't give a crap who's running the ball with the personnel that you now have back there. It's going to be a running back by committee regardless. So however you want to run the ball, if you're gaining positive yardage, give it to somebody else. Give the defense a different taste, because every single one of these guys can bring something to the table. I think it's ultimately going to come down to, though, Dan, is because now you have Gus Edwards, you have J.K. Dobbins, you have Kimani Vidal, who you just drafted, who could fit this running scheme perfectly. And then you've got Isaiah Spiller, who we're just still playing essentially the waiting game to see him have that moment. We saw flashes of it in last year's preseason, and ultimately a touchdown that ended up being called back. We've seen those flashes, but how is he going to garner that type of opportunity? How is he going to make his mark when you have these other three guys that are in that same running back stable? All I'll say is this: I don't know how it's going to shake out in terms of how you split playing time, or who's going to be active on game days. But this is, again, just breeding competition. And it's a great problem to have if you're in that running back room right now.
100%. 100%. El Chief Jeebus doing the Lord's work. Hit that like button. Show the channel some love. Yes, please. We appreciate all of the likes, subscribes, all the comments, all the reviews on Apple Podcasts and all that jazz over the years. It's always fun to kind of get those. Constructive criticism as well. We try to keep it as honest and as transparent as we can, brick by brick, trying to get better every day. But we appreciate all the love and all the comments and feedback and just engagement from all of you. There was a question in here. Kevin says, we finally have a true meritocracy now. Best player wins, right? It seems that way. It seems like both player and coaching perspective, they listen to their players, they listen to their coaches, and based on who knows best, group think, group performance, those are the ones that are going to be given the voice, given the mic to go in. Jake, friend of the show, director's here, by the way. Shout out to the director. Tip of the cap. Love you, buddy. We could sneak into Baltimore in the dead of night, kidnap Derrick Henry. He's a big guy, though. We might need to bring more Chargers podcasters with us. Sure as hell ain't going to be me. I can't drag him. The director, Jake? Dan Wade? If you go for Locked On Chargers?
This would be like that exercise that I've seen, where you've seen that video where it's like the female lioness has one end of the rope and there's like 8 guys on the other end of that rope just playing tug of war. That, to me, is pretty much what this would need. So you would need all hands on deck if you wanted to do that. For sure.
I'll be on the sideline just like waving the flag, like, go team. Because you're not getting much muscle from me. That's
you guys are doing great.
You're doing great. Keep up the effort. Here's a Gatorade. Let's see. Jared says bolts up. We have, let's see. Wes Kine says, this is an interesting topic, Jake. We need something for our new culture. Jets have a chant. Niners have their own boombox entrance. Cheeseheads, cheese chant, etc. We need something other than a little kid taking the shirt off. Which, that kid's awesome, by the way. The King, I forget his name, but kid's great. Family's great. We'll see. We'll see what the team has in store. It's a new era. We know that. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Sure
I wouldn't
that
be surprised.
the fan base will be able to create something based on this new culture shift. And whether it's from Harbaugh's standpoint and his chant and, who's got it better than us? Nobody. If you can get the whole crowd saying that, if from the player personnel, I'm sure that there will quickly become fan favorites with all the new faces that are on this team. So you'll definitely be able to create something. To Dan's point, and he was even asking Haley about this last week, are we going to see the usual pad smacking from Jim Harbaugh, much like he did with J.J. McCarthy at Michigan? Are we going to see that type of relationship between Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert? I would love it. All we really know is, all that's been voiced to us is that you're going to see a more physical brand of football as it relates to this Chargers team. We just haven't seen it yet. So stay tuned.
I agree. I will say, actually, I'm going to ask this in the comments, Chargers fans, what would you like to see this Chargers team do? What are some of the in-game, pre-game things that the Chargers team can do to kind of help make it ours? Put in the comments. If they see it, sweet. Let's see if we can make it happen. Director says, let's get a whole bunch of thunder clap him cheeks. Thunder clapped him cheeks. That's what we need. I'm down. Let's go. Demetrius says, ACDC Thunderstruck, rally towels, make like a playoff game atmosphere. Jason Sheet says, I was talking to Danny Hoyt, in-game announcer or in-game hype guy. I don't know his title, but great dude. We should all stomp our feet to mimic thunder during kickoffs. That'd be sweet. New theme song, let's go LA Superchargers, bring out the lights out dance. A whole bunch of things here. Keep them coming. Keep them coming as we continue this. Jake, back to Coach McDonald before we get to Sanjay Law. The one part that I did notice, the one player that I noticed you did not discuss him talking about was Isaiah Spiller, because we're all wondering what's going to happen with Isaiah Spiller and the stuff that we hope to see from him, and he's young and hasn't really gotten much, many reps.
I thought he did talk about Isaiah
Coach
Spiller.
McDonald talked about Isaiah Spiller and talked about the amount of room he has to grow, but that he is maturing. But then he has all of the tools. Get this, Jake, 220 plus pounds. He says great feet, can accelerate, can catch, blitz pickup, just needs to be pushed and understanding the standard. And then followed up with a quote, the standard is the standard. So he has the tools. And that right there to me spoke that this team has confidence in him and what he can bring. And that was one of the questions that a lot of people had about Isaiah Spiller specifically was, what does this new regime think or feel or believe in him? According to the running backs coach, that's a guy that they like. And they see the potential and they see all of the traits that can help him. We've seen his size compared to the rest of them, and it's pretty stark. He brings something to this team that they don't have, and I'm very curious to see what Isaiah Spiller has an opportunity to do. Then, Jake, we get to the wide receiver groups, and this is where we have our kind of discussion here. Jake, you got like a sun glare. This is pretty great.
Yeah, Amazon truck just decided to back its way into the street right here that literally blanked out the sun there for a minute. So we got just a small eclipse in the Hefner household for that reason. And I'm pretty sure it'll be coming right back here again in a few minutes. So don't be shocked.
Total eclipse of the Hefner house. Sanjay Law, Jake, came on. And this is where we'll kind of get into transition to the wide receiver storylines and expectations of this room. And there are so many different directions that we can go with this. And there's a bunch of people in the comments that are hyped about Brenden Rice and are hyped about Josh Palmer, and he's criminally underrated. And we're going to get to all of that here. So maybe to kind of kick this segment off, to the listeners, to the viewers, which receiver do you feel is has the most to prove in this group? I think some people say the easy answer would be Quentin Johnston, but I would argue that there's a lot of guys here with either chips on their shoulders, looking to have bounce back years, rookies trying to make the team. There's a lot of ways that this can go. But that's my question. Jake, Sanjay Law came on. Before I get that real quick, thank you for the reminder. Jared, Kim Navarro, did you guys speak on Corey Linsley being released? Yes, we did not. Corey Linsley was released, quote unquote. He's retiring, but also hilarious to me. If you go into the comments of some of those from like the bigger Adam Schefter accounts, how many fans of other teams are like, oh, what are the Chargers doing? That's stupid. Or, oh my gosh, Corey Linsley would be a great Jet. I think he would be awesome. Like, what? Come on. Like, it was hilarious. So anyways, yes, Corey Linsley is no longer with the team. He has been released / is retiring. We all knew this the entire offseason. Did the team a ton of favors at the offseason, help with salary cap. Incredible human on and off the field. The guy was an absolute stud for Justin Herbert when healthy. So, tip of the cap. Shout out to Linsley and Lindsey family. Health is always more important than anything else. But yes, Corey Linsley no longer on the team.
What was the stat that was dropped today, Dan, on Twitter? I can't remember who it was that actually put it out, but in X amount of snaps that Corey Linsley did not allow a sack, and the last one that he gave up was back in 2020. I mean, that was just an absolute ridiculous stat. So when you talk about some of the best centers in the league in terms of more recent years, who's been one of the best, Corey Linsley is in that discussion, no question about it. And we've seen plenty of times, we always talk about Rashawn Slater being the most important offensive lineman. Over the past 2 years, maybe you could argue that another way and say that when Corey Linsley went down, everything just disappeared. So there's no question that if he was healthy, how much he would stabilize this offensive line. And obviously, as Dan mentioned, his health concerns had forced him into an early retirement, which is unfortunate because he was still playing at an amazingly high level, very efficient, made that offensive line better. And you haven't seen a center like that for the Chargers since the days of Nick Hardwick.
Force multiplier.
Imagine that for a second, Dan. Imagine if Corey Linsley was getting coached by Nick Hardwick. Just imagine that for 2 seconds, that essentially you maybe have two of the best centers that ever have donned the lightning bolt, even if Corey Linsley's was only for a short period of time. Do you think about the vibe that those two could have had with one another? That would have been nice to see. But again, best wishes to Corey Linsley and his family. Health is obviously first, and whatever he ends up doing in this next phase of his career, we wish him well.
Yes. All right, moving on, Jake. Let's get to the wide receiver storylines, which I think this is going to be a fun one. So Sanjay Lal was up there at the podium today and talked a lot about a lot of different components, talked about most of the receivers that they had on the team, and started off his conversation just about the reason for him coming to this team was because of Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh and the young receivers. And we go back to that attention to detail component of Jim Harbaugh. Sanjay Lal talked about where Jim Harbaugh isn't afraid to stop meetings or stop plays mid-stride and get to the granularity of, how many yards this receiver should be going in and out of the break, when it should be stopped versus 10, 9, 11 yards. Super detail-oriented. If the quarterback drop is being a bit off, and just going right into it and fixing it at the point, and isn't pressed for time. And a lot of times you see coaching staff try to get in and out of stuff, and he's right there with them. The interesting part, Sanjay Lal is highly coveted and is well respected within the NFL. And one of the reasons why I believe he mentioned that he coaches through the quarterback's eyes when he is training these wide receivers, and is always having open dialogue between the quarterback group and the coaches. And as a wide receiver group as a whole, he praised their willingness to work and learn, and believed this is the youngest wide receiver room he's worked with. Before we get to any of the specific players that he mentioned, Jake, overall thoughts on Sanjay Lal and his conference?
I think it was great insight because this is obviously the first time that we've had a chance to hear him at the podium, even going all the way back to when the coaching staff was being built together. I think this is fascinating, again, just to see the involvement that Jim Harbaugh is putting into his relationship with all of his position coaches. And for Sanjay to say up there that he has no problem interrupting someone talking and basically just getting into it. And as he was talking about, no, this is how we're going to do it. And Jim will actually act out the specific route that someone wants to run. And here's Jim Harbaugh again, much like when we saw in the rookie OTAs, where he's out there with the ropes and just getting involved. And this is Jim Harbaugh, and this is the culture that he's instilling. But more so, and we'll tie this in, obviously, with some Marcus Brady and Greg Roman comments here about how we can all kind of project this offense to look like. But Sanjay Lal has worked, has some familiarity with new Chargers wide receiver DJ Chark. He was the wide receivers coach for the Seattle Seahawks when DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett both had 1,000 yards receiving seasons. And obviously DK Metcalf will be a nice comparison for a player here in just a second as it relates to building them up to their next level. But the perspective here, Dan, And when you look at certain drills that are being done in OTAs, like the tarp drill that was being done for anticipation between Justin Herbert and the receiver and not knowing where it's going to come from, and to now have Sanjay Lal, who's been with plenty of different teams and coached up very, very good wide receivers in that time frame. I love this perception that he's coaching him through the quarterback's eyes. How are you going to build that relationship? That type of tie-in and that anticipation and being on the same page when it comes to game time. And even as Sanjay said, he's throwing a lot at this young wide receiver group early.
Yep.
But as he also said, they're young and they're willing to learn and they're just trying to grasp everything that's coming at them right now, which in this particular circumstance you do, because talk about an overhaul at one position, wide receiver is going to be at the top.
Yep. So let's get into what he said about some of the receivers specifically. So we'll get into Quentin and Josh Palmer and their podium discussions here in a bit. But on Quentin Johnston, Sanjay Lal said that he moved as well as any wide receiver he's seen and that his potential is very high. The things they're working on with him are to master the techniques. Noted that he has a ton of juice working on body positioning, some of the start-stop routes, trying to not look as early, referencing quite the jump that he's made this year. And all those aforementioned things that I brought up are things that he praised Quentin Johnston for working on improving. And so we'll get to his press conference in a bit, but it appears not just from what Quentin has been saying, but what Josh and his peers have been saying, Quentin Johnston has been maturing. He has matured in terms of his work ethic, being more self-critical, learning the game, being a student of the game, and trying to improve. We saw him with Marvin Harrison Jr. This past offseason, working on some stuff, especially on plays on the outside, at least with routes. So he's referenced that he's made quite the jump this year. And this is Sanjay Lal. And what Sanjay Lal talks about receivers, I listen. On Ladd McConkey, he mentioned he is very sudden in his breaks, understands the game, precise learner. I am so excited to see what Ladd McConkey looks like in this offense. The guy just seems like he's going to be a quarterback whisperer, or quarterback's best friend, however you want to talk about it. Sanjay Lal mentioned kind of the impact that he has had using previous receivers he'd worked with as drills for this current team. Talked about DK Metcalf and T.Y. Hilton and some of the players that they've worked together with and the drills they've had that them do. And then now they're starting to show the proof to this current wide receiver room. Obviously, different archetypes within the wide receiver room here in LA, but he sees some of the DK Metcalf stuff working with a one Quentin Johnston, and you're seeing some things with T.Y. Hilton as well. Mentioned Brenden Rice is kind of working through some things with him. Anything on those three, Brenden, Ladd, QJ, from Sanjay?
Yeah, quick thing on Ladd, Dan, and this kind of just ties into what we were talking about earlier in terms of that becoming the favorite target of Justin Herbert and those third down specific plays that he's throwing to him. Sanjay went on to say, if you have to hit it at 13 yards, I'm trusting that Ladd's going to hit it at 13 yards. So if you need that third and long conversion, and if you already have your wide receivers coach talking about it, you know that the rest of the offense in general is sharing that same type of sentiment as it relates to Ladd McConkey. And for this early to be thinking about that, here we go into the same reason why everybody was stoked when Ladd McConkey was the second pick for the Chargers and what he could bring to the table in terms of his versatility as a wide receiver. Dan, I really liked how he approached Quentin Johnston. And obviously, Quentin Johnston will have some thoughts on this in just a second, just from his own comments. But Sanjay Lal in this was completely fair because he wasn't his wide receiver coach last year. And you're never going to want to look back because obviously this last year, Quentin Johnston, and in certain circumstances, rightfully so, garnered a lot of flack for his play. And as Dan was talking about in the earlier comments, that Quentin Johnston has matured. He is learning. He is still learning, obviously, but he wants to be a better version of himself. Sanjay was talking about he's familiar with Quentin. He was scouting for Quentin when he was with the Seattle Seahawks last year because they ultimately ended up drafting Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I think And not to do a direct one-to-one comparison, especially with DK Metcalf, because in terms of specimen, DK is like in a class of his own. But in terms of the athletic ability that you can really bring out from Quentin Johnston, the opportunity is here. And I go back also to a Jim Harbaugh who knows what Quentin Johnston can do when it's Quentin Johnston at his best, because we saw what Quentin Johnston did when he was with when it was with TCU and the game that he had against Michigan that year. So you're talking about guys now that are very familiar with his game, and in terms of getting him back to what he does well. Yes, Quentin Johnston himself had focus issue, had some drops last year. There was a lot of things thrown at him last year, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for that. But much like Justin Herbert, there were a lot of other different elements that kept Quentin Johnston from being what we were hoping that he was going to be when he had to step up for Mike Williams when he went down for the year. So we'll get into those comments from Quentin Johnston here in a second. But I really liked how Sanjay Lal approached that.
Brian Stowe says QJ has dropped the ball in OTAs this year, and I don't know if that's pun intended or not, but I thought
he had a drop on one video clip. I know what he's referencing, but it's just, again,
yeah, but other receivers did too. So like,
better he drop it now than in September.
But also, like, if we're being completely honest here, any other receivers dropping balls, no one's going to talk about it. But if Quentin does, that's going to be the headline for a lot of Chargers fans because they were quote unquote burned last year. Like, I get it, but I thought this was interesting because I believe it was Daniel Popper who was asking Sanjay Lal about the drops. And I think he kind of was seemingly kind of trying to drill in about the drops and Quentin Johnston and kind of his development and everything like that and what he's trying to learn from last year. And Sanjay Lal kind of pushed back on the, a receiver has a drop issue, quote unquote. And Sanjay Lal was referencing so many different components that can cause a drop. And there are pieces to it, right? Like is it a concentration issue? Is it like your eyes are off? Is it a hand placement issue? Is it a vertical tracking issue? Are your hips wrong? It's about finding which component is the deficiency in fixing that entail will fix the drops. So everyone can say he's got a drop issue or he can't catch. Like that fundamentally might be like the end result, but that's not what's causing the issues. He's talked about, we'll talk about this in a second, but Quentin Johnston talked about some of the lack of focus and maybe some of the yips or some of the anxiousness about being a rookie and just trying to, get the ball all the time versus focusing on the quarterback vision. Like Sanjay Lal is looking at this from the lens of breaking it down to the granularity to where you can find out what the issue is, find the problem, fix the problem. I thought this was fun. He talked about Josh Palmer, and you could tell he kind of lit up talking about Josh Palmer and how he listens intently and he digests things and he's a thinker and that he appreciates that. And what was kind of fun for me to envision was when he was referencing Josh Palmer's Keenan Allen game. And if he could take that Keenan Allen style of game that he has and bring and add a downfield element to it, then they've got a brand new player, a better player with a vertical element and Keenan swag and route running. And so I think it's exciting to see what they can do with Josh Palmer, referencing Josh Palmer still dealing with a knee injury that he's rehabbing, although this was the most kind of run he had so far to date today, which was good, or yesterday, I think. And then this was an interesting stat he kind of brought up was, a lot of people talk about the run game and everything, and he referenced his time in Buffalo with Greg Roman, where they had the number one run game, but they also had the number one completion percentage of teams throwing past 35 yards. Which, how often have we Chargers fans begged and pleaded for explosive plays downfield, only to watch 8 to 10 yard slants and digs and ends and throws go out of bounds because guys not open or drops? Yeah, sign me up for that.
I go back to tying this all together for what you're talking about. This is even before the Chargers had their draft and we knew who was going to end up on this team. And we were talking about, especially after going through the likes of the Joe Lombardi offenses and the Kellen Moore offenses. And then we get to hear, everybody talk about what they think is going to take place when Greg Roman comes in and say Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are just going to run the ball. Okay, got it. And then you heard Marcus Brady take the podium a few months back before the draft. He talks about his collaboration with Greg, with Jim, with Justin, in terms of exactly what they're going to do. And it's not just going to be run, run, run. They're going to create a progressive concept. That's what they want to do, to ultimately not just to ensure that the running game improves, which obviously is one of the biggest priorities of what Jim Harbaugh said he wanted to correct when he came in here. But ultimately, how are you going to make Justin Herbert better? Dan, when we had Sean Merriman on the show just a few weeks back, he said, if anybody thinks that Jim Harbaugh with Justin Herbert as his quarterback is just going to sit back there and run it 50 times a game, you're going to surprise some defenses if you really think that that's what's going to happen. And now you tie this in with Sanjay Lal. I think, they're going to take what the defense gives them. I think the running game, it's been a long time since we've said this, but the running game is going to open up those lanes for those wide receivers. And especially if Justin Herbert is being protected, you're going to see him air the ball out. So the entirety of this offensive concept of what you're going to put together with these coaches, with these players, and ultimately with your quarterback should be having people very excited about it. It definitely is not going to be a one-trick pony show.
I agree. Quentin Johnston's at the podium today. Jake, what were your main takeaways from Quentin?
I think there's a lot of humility to what Quentin Johnston was saying about himself, obviously referencing the Green Bay game, which, Dan, you were at. He said he hates looking back on that at any point in time. It really puts him in a bad mood. And obviously that was a pivotal game that could have helped tie the Chargers with the Green Bay Packers at that particular point. It was a very tumultuous year for Quentin Johnston. And a lot was thrown at him from a rookie standpoint. And there was a lot of barbs that were thrown his direction. And there was more than just that Green Bay game that you could go back and you could reference to say, oh, yes, drop again. Didn't play physical enough, caught with his body. There was a lot of things that you can reference to. But as it relates to what Quentin has talked about in terms of his mindset and his focus now, and this is why I loved how Sanjay Lal approached this, is to say, look, last year was last year. It was different coaches. It was different personnel around you. You now know what the expectation is for yourself because you don't have 2 or 3 guys that are going to be playing up in front of you. There's going to be a lot more expected of you this year, but you should also expect more out of yourself. And I think that Quentin Johnston knows that. I think that he knows how disappointing his season was last year, and he does not want anything close to a repeat of that. So it's going to, I definitely think, obviously, is it a process? Yes. But at the same time, with this coaching group and this supporting cast around you, I think there's a much better chance that you see a huge jump from Quentin. Not that the bar is set necessarily high,
sure,
but if we're talking that something that you could find Quentin Johnston hovering between 700 and 800 yards and maybe 4 or 5 touchdowns on the season, to me, that's a great season.
Yeah. Brian Stowe says NFL wide receivers should catch passes thrown right into their hands, in my opinion. No one's arguing that. I don't think a single person's arguing that. I don't think Quentin Johnston would argue that. And I think that's kind of what made this press conference a little bit more exciting for me to root for Quentin Johnston, both him paired with what Josh Palmer said about him, paired with what Sanjay Lal is working on with him. Like, I think a lot of people are, and some people are saying in the chat where I think it was Caleb here was saying everyone wants QJ to be better, but then they flame him. And you see it far too often, and it's just unfortunate. And I think QJ has the makeup to shut up a lot of haters and shut up a lot of critics who have given up on him entirely, calling him a bust after this year. And again, Quentin had drops that were bad and had times where you mentioned he was not physical enough and he had rookie mistakes that rookies make. Like, that's the whole point. And he owned that fully in his press conference today. He kind of talked about this whole offseason was about kind of self-evaluation and him being kind of critical of himself and needing to kind of build the confidence, and having that year under his belt has been very helpful for him in developing a better routine on and off the field, and kind of referenced some of the nerves and rookie jitters and kind of rushing things that plagued some of his play last year. Like, he talked about it. And I believe, between Coach Sanjay Lal and with Jim Harbaugh and how detail-oriented the entire staff is, I think they're going to fix or help him. I really do, both in mechanics, in play style, in scheme, in situation. That's what I'm excited about for him. You mentioned he referenced the Green Bay game and it haunts him, and he kind of uses that as fuel for when maybe he's tired or wants to take a playoff or is, whatever. That's his motivation. And what I think some people maybe misconstrue a bit here with him is he will tell you that some of his play was unacceptable. He quite literally said in the press conference today, some of his mistakes were, quote, straight up unacceptable. So he understands the assignment. He knows the gaps and he's working on that. And I think that he has the tools and the people around him and the resources to make it happen. Biggest lessons he had last year: confidence in route running, needs to focus on attention to detail, needs to be more patient. Kind of said he was a little bit more rushed last year. And he did not focus enough on being on the quarterback's time, which I think that is huge. Talked about his relationship with Justin Herbert improving and locking in with him immediately right after a play ends to sync up to make sure what needs to get fixed. So he understands and even acknowledged all of the drops that he had last year. And he noticed and acknowledged the difference in when he caught the ball versus when he dropped. And all of the drops he had were due to concentration and not looking the ball into the tuck. And he said, quote, "You can't catch something you can't see." And so, Jake, to your point, I admire the humility. I admire the honesty, the self-reflection, and openness and honesty that he brought. Like, he's not shying, running away from it. He's not giving excuses. And I admire that. Like, that, there's metal to him that I think a lot of fans can learn a thing or two from. So instead of flaming him and talking about how crappy he was and all the things he could do better, let's try to support him. Let's try to give him a chance. Let's see what he can do. Let's see what his coaching staff can do with him. I was really impressed with the way he conducted the interview.
I was too, Dan. And Joshua Palmer, to segue it here, talked about how much his focus has now just been like a recharge for him, and to talk about the difference between where he was last year compared to where he is now coming into camp. And you can talk about everything as it relates to the drops. Dan, you and I were at camp last year, and it looked like Quentin Johnston was catching every damn thing that was thrown to him, even the deep balls.
But I also remember a half where it was like, dude.
I also remember Jamar Chase's rookie camp where everybody was talking about he's dropping everything. And then look at the dichotomy to where Jamar Chase has gone to 1 year of Quentin Johnston. So to Dan's point, I understand it was frustrating last year for him, but this is now, I think, I think this is the best position he could possibly be in for him to succeed, not just from the standpoint of the personnel that's around him, even from a standpoint of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams not being here. Yeah, you would want to have them there as it relates to this team being better, but as it relates to Quentin Johnston directly, this is a great opportunity for him. And with this coaching staff, as Dan mentioned, that's really going to be the X factor. The coaching personnel has been something that the Chargers have suffered in multiple positions for a number of different years. This is where you're going to find improvement.
Yep. Stephen Rutledge says, what about QJ was taking downs off, not running his routes? Talked about that in the press conference too. Like, he owned all of it. He talked about how during that Green Bay game, how he stopped, took off stride, wasn't paying attention, wasn't finishing the route, and then made the catch a lot harder than it needed to be. Like, all of the things that people are giving him criticism for, he's owned. He's talked about. So, like, I don't know why we're still here. And to James Wagner's point and to Sanjay Lal's point, I'm over last year, says James. Excited about Q's future and for the Chargers. Okay, Josh Palmer is at the podium. Jake, you mentioned a couple other components that he had mentioned. What were your key takeaways from Mr. Palmer at the podium?
He's talking about the biggest difference between this training camp and last year's training camp. The attention to detail has been glaring compared to any other camp that he's been on, and that's in college or pro. So obviously we know he's probably talking about Jim Harbaugh and his impact already on the team. He went in to talk about Ben Herbert and his conditioning for the wide receivers, once again saying he's very detailed. And his quote was saying, everything has a reason for why you should or should not do something. So here we go again with just, it doesn't matter if it's the little haikus or the little nuances. It's creating a mindset for the team. And that's what I love about this. And Dan, you and I talked about Joshua Palmer a couple weeks ago, actually. And kind of the forgotten wide receiver out of the group. Maybe one of the more underappreciated guys. Now, for Josh, it's a big year for him. It's going into a contract year. Don't sleep on the possibility of Joshua Palmer quickly becoming wide receiver one. If it isn't there already in pencil, just from the standpoint that he's the longest tenured wide receiver with this team and with Justin Herbert, you go back to when he's healthy. And Dan and I talked about this as it relates to the comparisons. For anybody who's gotten a chance to go out in training camp, and if you remember what the ladder drills look like, and I would assume that everybody would see this because they put the ladder net right up to the fence where the fans are, it would always be Keenan Allen going first. And obviously when Keenan Allen goes through the ladder drill, it was just like right through water.
It's a blur.
Was smooth as it could be. It was poetry. And then you'd watch Joshua Palmer do it, and it would be just almost just as good as Keenan Allen. And through the tenure that Joshua Palmer has been here, his route running has arguably been the next best of anybody that was on the team outside of Keenan Allen during that time period. And when he is on, he's on. He can play those outside-inside situations where you need him to. When he's healthy, he's had plays where he's turned up in the times where you really need him to. So I'm excited to see what this season's going to be with essentially Josh now being the number one guy in the locker room, the leader of that locker room to pair with DJ Chark in terms of veteran presence. But I'm really excited to see what he's going to bring to the table in a contract year.
I am too. Breeze B with the $6.99 donation. Thank you. Y'all the best, man. An interesting question here. Can the Bolts accelerate Corey Linsley's $5 million cap next year to this year? Since there's enough salary cap space. I believe they owe him $2.5 million per year for the next 2 years, which I believe is that $5 million he's referring to. Is the team able to lump that into this year and just do $5 million once, let it rip? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't. And especially when you're talking about someone who's, retiring now.
It's there's a lot of nuance to this.
I am not sure how that would work. I haven't heard of any specifics about that, even with other players retiring.
Like there's the retirement, the release, and the dead cap and the restructure all playing into this. So
right.
I don't want to answer that incorrectly. I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn. But thank you for the question. If you have another question, we'll put it at the top because of the fantastic donation. Josh Palmer, Jake, talked about this being a whole new team. And you talked about kind of the attention to detail. And he says, you can't miss it if you're in the building with us. You cannot miss the attention to detail. Reference like immediate feedback this coaching staff has on routes and how fast or quick or slow you need to get in and out of them. On Jim Harbaugh, talked about how, loves him as a coach, what he means what he says what he means. He's working through that knee injury. He said it's delayed how long before he's able to get out there and really start moving, but this is the most work he's had. And he's just been focusing on learning the new offense and being on the same page as Justin Herbert. He referenced Ben Herbert's training program, that he's very detailed as well. Everything he says has a reason and an explanation, with even going through like how high or low a certain exercise had to be to the belly button. Like he was going into the real specifics. And then it was cool. He talked about some of the former receivers on his team. Praised Ladd McConkey's route running, talked about how special he is, and noted his performance at the Senior Bowl. And also, to our earlier point on Quentin Johnston, he felt he was a lot more mature this year in terms of how to do things and being more honest and critical of himself and his own play. And so lots of things said about this receiving core as a whole. And we've kind of talked about this a few different times. And I think what we wanted to kind of end this discussion about, and I'm curious, I'll pose a few questions here in the chat as we go. But I guess kind of the first question, and we'll ask folks in the chat, you guys let us know your thoughts. But as a whole, right, we're going to talk about this wide receiver group in terms of expectations and, what we're hoping from this team, right? But to start this off, losing Keenan, losing Mike, and there's a bunch of churn and all this kind of stuff. But with the additions, both player and staff, is this wide receiver group better than it was last year? So in the chat, is the wide receiver group better than it was last year? I can emphatically say that this wide receiver group is far deeper than it was last year, or
that's the correct term,
any year that I can remember this Chargers team. But is the wide receiver group better? Jake, what say you?
You can't say it's better when we're talking about the first year without Keenan Allen, and you haven't seen a majority of these guys play with Justin Herbert yet in meaningful snaps. You can't say that. To your point, though, Dan, are they deeper, more competitive? That I would say resoundingly. Remember, the first night of the draft when the Chargers took Joe Alt, they had 4 wide receivers signed to their roster. And now just a couple months later, they almost have too many. People are telling them to stop signing wide receivers because all of a sudden there was such an influx with drafting 3, signing DJ Chark, possibly looking at other guys to bring in on top of that. It's ridiculous, obviously, just the shift that was done like that. So better? No, you can't say better without Keenan Allen, not in the first year, not by a long shot. But deeper, I will definitely say yeah.
Let me push back, though, because we can say they're not better because, of Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, but we also knew, and there are people that talked about this, T.O. says we knew what to expect if healthy. That was always the asterisk on everything. But the reality of the situation was rarely were they all healthy between Keenan and Mike. And as of late, it was more Mike than Keenan that was hurt, but earlier in his career, it was more Keenan than Mike. There's also Josh Palmer dealing with some injuries as well. And then after those 2 or 3, it was like a Niagara Falls drop-off that just kept going and going and going before you saw someone that was brought up on the practice squad. No one was brought in on free agency or a trade. So I would argue it's better. I would argue what will be on the field is better. If you go back and look at how many games were played by the guys that were no longer here, Mike Williams played, 3 games last year? Was always hurt. I think he had 1,000-yard receiving season. I loved Mike Williams. I love Keenan Allen. They're both incredible. I don't know if that tandem brought Justin the potential that he can bring that this receiving core does. There were things missing on that receiving core that were plaguing this team year over year, game after game, where they were just scratching and clawing for first downs. Whereas now they've got receivers that could take the top off at any given point and they can win. They mentioned a basketball team. They legit have a basketball team now with a point guard They've got a shooting guard. They actually have a small forward for once that can do something. Like, I do think the receiving core is better. And that's no disrespect to Keenan and Mike. But if you take the averages of all the grades, of all the potentials, and put them up, stack rank them, average it out, it's better.
I'll come to the middle of the road with you, and I'll say it's more versatile. It's definitely the most versatile group that Justin Herbert has had since he has been in the league, and that's any of the receiving core over the previous 4 years, 100%. Because now you look at this wide receiver group and what it's made up of, we're almost now saying, are the Chargers going to keep 7 wide receivers on the board? Probably not. They'll probably mostly keep 6. There's no way you can keep 7 with all the other position needs. But it's hard to find the odd man out with all of this talent that you have. And to Dan's point, Joshua Palmer and Ladd McConkey can do a lot of the same things. DJ Chark and Quentin Johnston, for what they're going to be asked for, can do a lot of the same things. You factor in Brenden Rice to that. We know what Darius Davis and Cornelius Johnson are going to do on special teams. So definitely a lot more versatile.
Realistically, right? We heard Sanjay Lal talk about how, and we've all noted the similarities of Joshua Palmer and Keenan Allen in that style of play that Keenan Allen has. And I'm not sitting here saying that Josh Palmer is Keenan Allen. I'm not saying that. But I don't think there's a massive drop-off at 32-year-old Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer right now. Go look at some of the graphs. So I don't think there's that much of a difference there. Mike Williams. Let's just say Mike Williams for a second. The combination of DJ Chark and, if you want to say, Brenden Rice, or you want to put in QJ, if you can get to the physical potential that he has, I don't think it's that much. I think you're kind of going pros and kind of going give and take there. DJ Chark may not be the 50-50 catch guy, although he definitely is, but not as much as Mike Williams. Mike Williams is probably the best jump ball guy in the NFL when healthy, but same with DJ Chark. But DJ Chark would roast Mike Williams and any other defenders that Mike Williams can't do. So there's an edge there. Ladd McConkey brings the element that this team has not had, period. Then you add in a Brenden Rice, who I think will get playing time. I think will make this team. Darius Davis, we have no clue how he's going to be used. There's so many different ways that this team can win at the wide receiver position. And that will benefit Justin Herbert far more than having 2-star $30 million receivers. I don't think there's any question that this receiving room will be better. Do they need, is Josh Palmer going to be as good as Keenan Allen? Is he going to be an all-pro? I don't know. But he doesn't need to be. I don't think they need to have a single all-pro, Pro Bowl player on the roster, and they could feast, in my opinion. So I guess as a segue then, kind of the last topic here, what do we expect from this group? You go back and look at some of the stats from these players over years past and where they win, where they lose, where they're most effective. What do you see this turning into?
Versatile, efficient, faster. If I was to think of the top 3 words that I would think of when I think of this group, those would be the 3 that would come to mind. I said this previously. I don't see a 1,000-yard receiver coming out of this group. And it's not from the standpoint of saying that nobody can't do that. But if we're talking about, as we are, with the possibility of the Chargers keeping 6 receivers, and then how many times are you going to run the ball? And how many times are you going to give that opportunity for Justin Herbert to all of a sudden play with a lead and control the clock? And reminder, there's only 1 football to go around. And we haven't even mentioned the tight ends in this group. If you could get this entire group of wide receivers to be in the range of 550 to 950, that's efficiency.
Yeah. Give me a few guys at 900 to 700. Yes.
I won't even tell you the touchdowns because you can't even try to predict that. But if you can have just each wide receiver's total yardage hovering around that, that's a win. That's efficient. That's something that Justin Herbert was not able to get out of his previous wide receiver regimes or groups. But again, my only pushback to you, Dan, in terms of calling it better, it's hard to see that when you haven't had this group actually play. But in terms of what they bring to the table, as I said, the most versatile group that Justin Herbert has ever had at his disposal right now, that's what I would say that you get. To your point, you don't need a $30 million wide receiver that goes for 1,000-yard, 1,500-yard season and 22 touchdowns every year to win a game. There is more ways to skin a cat in football and win games. This is going to be the Chargers' way to do it.
How about this? I think this is the middle road question then. Is this wide receiver room going to be more effective than receiving rooms we've seen here in the past?
Yes. And I'll say it from this perspective. The running game is going to help those wide receivers tremendously.
Totally.
The Chargers are not going to be in 3rd and 18 for as often as they were last year or the year before that, trying to have Justin Herbert play Superman every down. You're going to see much more situations where it's 3rd and 4, 3rd and 2, and you can be a lot more versatile in your play calling. So in terms of effectiveness, 100%, but that's the perspective that I'm looking at it, because it's going to be a much more well-balanced team.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if it was me guessing, like I'm kind of just going quickly here through kind of the players in this room, like I think Ladd McConkey is going to be primarily kind of like that slot. I mean, I think he has some outside flexibility as well, but I think he's going to roast people in the intermediate center of the field. That's what he did in college. He had an elite 97.8 grade according to PFF in the center of the field and the intermediate route. Insane numbers there. But honestly, he was great to elite in, I think, everyone except the deep left, apparently. Ladd McConkey is going to be kind of the center fielder, but I think will become kind of the third Allen, but we'll have a new one for obviously Ladd McConkey. Brenden Rice, I think he's going to be kind of like the intermediate to deep guy. And he might not have like the quickest 40 time, but when you get him moving, I like Brenden Rice downfield. The wild card to me is still going to be Quentin Johnston. Like I kind of throw out some of the stats from his rookie year because everything just kind of went wrong. But I think Quentin is the wild card. Like I don't know what they want him to be. I don't. I think they want him to be a boundary guy, but I think they want him to be kind of multiple. Josh Palmer, I think he's going to make a leap this year. I'm really excited to see what he does. And then the wild cards are kind of Darius Davis. We don't know what they're going to use him for. Cornelius Johnson, like, will he make the team? Practice squad, we're not sure. DJ Chark, love what he can bring. I think he's going to be such a breath of fresh air for this team and can open up the field. So, yeah, I'm excited because they have so many different ways they can win football games with the receiving core. And, oh, by the way, they're probably going to be running 2 tight end sets a ton and running the ball too. So it's not like they're having to depend on this group to win every game. So the Jim Harbaugh way, the Jim Harbaugh era, it works. And they are giving themselves so many flavors. This is like Baskin Robbins of how to win football games. And so I'm all about it, man. I think this receiving room is going to be a fun one. Can't wait for camp battles. Can't wait to see what they can bring to Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert will look better. I think he, in years past, kind of used Keenan Allen as a safety valve a ton. Mike Williams as a safety valve, just kind of chuck it up to him at times. This team, I think this wide receiver room will do him more favors. And his coaching staff will do him more favors. So lots to discuss. We went long a bit today. But, Jake, do we miss anything in kind of the key storylines for the receivers or the podium takeaways from OTAs?
No, I was excited to get into this live show specifically talking about the wide receiver storyline just because it's it's so new, and the timing matched up perfect with Sanjay Lal, Quentin Johnston, and Joshua Palmer taking the podium yesterday. So we knew we wanted to do this and bounce these type of questions off you guys in terms of what your thoughts were on it, because it's a brand new wide receiver room. It's going to be a brand new offense as it relates with this Chargers team. And there's so many interconnecting storylines as far as what this offense is going to ultimately look like by the time that we hit September. So lots to discuss. Think we covered it, and glad we were able to do it on the live show.
Yes, Wes Kine, thank you for these live sessions. We appreciate you both. We appreciate you. Like Jake said, these are always probably the most fun episodes that we have, because you give us just as many ideas and comments and commentary that we probably didn't think of. And it's always fun just to get people's perspective on all of these things. These are always the best times. You know, it's wild, Jake. You've said it before in years past, in weeks past, episodes past. It's only June, or it's only May, it's only March, it's only April. And everyone is so hyped about this Chargers team. And there's reason for that. It's because they've got dudes, they've got the staff, they've got a lot of momentum. And so I think Chargers fans have a damn good reason to be optimistic and to be excited. And we shall see. Anything else you want to tell the great friends, Jake, before we head on out of here? I got dinner. I'm hungry.
Same. I'm ready to eat, but I'm also ready for football to be back. So let's speed up the clock a little bit.
Yes, please. For Jake Hefner, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network, this has been so much fun. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please hit that like and subscribe if you've not already done so. And we will talk to you next on the next Chargers Unleashed. Take care. Have a good night, everybody.
Whether you're a morning person or a bedtime procrastinator, everyone deserves a mattress that works for their style. And you'll find the best mattress for you at Ashley. The new Temper-Adapt collection at Ashley brings you one-of-a-kind body-conforming technology, making every sleep tailored to be your best. The collection also features cool-to-the-touch covers and motion absorption to help minimize sleep disruptions from partners, pets, or kids. Shop the all-new Temper-Adapt collection at Ashley, in-store or online at ashley.com. Ashley, for the love of home.